Hello. So in this very special fourth video of my Halloween 2020 season, um, I'm talking with filmmaker Jeff Monahan. We're going to be discussing his 2013 film Corpsing. So first off, Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Jeff Monahan is an actor, screenwriter, director, and producer. He's also taught acting and screenwriting at numerous universities such as Carnegie Mellon, Point Park, Seton Hill, Chatham, and NYU. Last year, he taught in Kathmandu, Nepal, which I'm sure was an amazing experience in itself.
Definitely.
And while he was there, he shot some of his documentary Actors on Macbeth. So first off, Jeff, I want to, a lot of your films, a lot of your work is in horror. So can you talk about what drew you to horror as a genre, or maybe more broadly, why you think horror is an important genre?
Well, for me personally, I was really shy when I was a kid. I didn't have many friends. I didn't like going to school, and the big event of the week was every Saturday night Chiller Theater in Pittsburgh. Bill Cardille and all that. And so every Saturday night I'd be up till 3 a.m. watching monster movies, and I just fell in love with them. And I think most horror films don't work. They're just they don't click. But when they do click, and it's an emotional, visceral thing, they really click with me. And I think there's different sort of subgenres with it, and it's something that I've always been a fan of them. I think possibly because I think our function as human beings is to feel and to be moved, and so often through life we don't. So if something with poetry or something with literature or for a film, you have this sort of automatic response, and horror takes us back to a childlike naivete. I think about wonder, because there's different ways I think you can be affected by a horror film. Some are just escapism. It's like an amusement park ride, and it's fun. You know, Michael Myers isn't really going to get you, and you're not really scared, but it's a fun ride. I think the most frightening films I've ever seen were like The Innocents, based on Henry James' Turn of the Screw, The Haunting, the original one with Julie Harris, and then there's like ones that disturb you, like I think more recently, like Midsummer or Hereditary, the Ari Aster films, The Ring in a sense, Babadook, so different things that kind of get under your skin. The Exorcist certainly disturbed a lot of people when it came out almost 50 years ago, oddly enough. But I think it's important for us to allow ourselves to experience life, to feel, and I think that's one of the things that horror films do. They do tap into that. So.
Okay. So let's turn now specifically to Corpsing. Would you like to give us a plot overview, or would you like me to do that?
I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. So I'll let you do that if that's okay.
Okay. So
Corpsing, and I may learn something, because it's always fun. Like when you make something, somebody will come up and say, "That was really this," and you think, "Oh, yeah, that's what you got. Oh, cool." You know, so because I have my own viewpoint, which I'll share with you. But go ahead.
Okay. So Corpsing is the story of a young scientist named Shelley. She invites to her increasingly rusty and not decaying, but sort of rundown lab. She invites to her lab her former professor, Peter, who, because he had alerted the deans of the university or whoever it is to Shelley's dissertation work on reanimating dead tissue, she had actually been kicked out of her PhD program. And so she invites him over, and basically the film is the story that she tells him about her work after she had been kicked out of this program. And it sort of gradually emerges also that Shelley and Peter had a romantic relationship. So that adds another layer of sort of depth and complexity to one of the central themes of the film, which is about teaching. And we'll talk about that later in the interview. But what Shelley essentially has done is, after getting a job in the morgue, she's started experimenting with reanimating corpses, human corpses. And so she's finally successful with some very fresh corpses that she finds in a car wreck, and that she sort of stitches together into one person. She reanimates this person and basically teaches this reanimated body how to exist as a human being, how to do things like speaking, like simple motor functions, like walking. And as their relationship develops, she eventually names him Thomas. And as their relationship develops, he becomes an increasingly complex character with his own needs, his own desires, his own agenda. But what ends up happening is there's an unintended problem or an unanticipated problem that in order for his body to maintain itself, Thomas needs to eat living flesh. And so they start out with rats and things like this, but then it has to escalate to the point that he has to eat people. And one of the most interesting dynamics of that is that Shelley continually sacrifices parts of her own body for Thomas to eat, but that becomes unsustainable pretty quickly, and so they begin murdering people. All of this is sort of interspersed with Peter and Shelley's interactions as she's telling the story, and he's expressing doubt about the veracity of her story. And the film sort of eventually draws to its conclusion where Shelley reveals that the dead body in the tank that Peter had thought was Thomas is in fact Peter's wife, and Thomas and Shelley end up consuming Peter in the final moments of the film, which regenerates their physical bodies enough that they have this delightful, almost like Shakespearean comedy sort of dance scene at the end, celebrating their relationship. And the last thing I do want to say before I take you to our next question is that this is a film that is very much your film. Like, I don't think you actually ran the cameras, but this is something that you wrote, you directed, and you played both Peter and Thomas, which in a film where there's really only 3 characters, you played 2/3 of them. So this is very much your film in a very thorough way.
It's my fault, but yeah, it's definite. But I love the way you pitch it. I'm gonna have to get you to pitch everything I write now. That was really good. Got to see that. Yeah.
So the first thing that I'm interested in here, Corpsing is very definitely a Frankenstein adaptation. The idea of a scientist reanimating dead tissue, creating a living person, etc., etc. But one of the big themes in Mary Shelley's novel, and I'll note parenthetically that the protagonist's name in your film, Shelley, is taking us back to Mary Shelley. But one of the big themes in Frankenstein the novel is this sort of gendered problem of birth without a mother figure. the male scientist creating life. But here you've got a female Dr. Frankenstein. So how does that sort of change or open up the gender dynamics of the story?
When the film was released in Germany, they actually retitled it Lady Frankenstein,
Oh, okay.
which was interesting. For me, you have Shelley and you have Peter, and there is that dynamic between them. And then Thomas is actually made of a collection of male and female bodies.
Yeah.
So there was a thing with Thomas where he is at some points very feminine in some of his speech and movement, and even though the relationship becomes more heterosexually bent when it goes physical, it's still that mush of things, that mixture of them. So I think the idea of these things coming together, you have the teacher and the student, but after a while the student becomes wiser than the teacher and has done more than the teacher, and you have this blurring of the lines between sex, between identity, between all three of them. So they're all sort of, in a sense, they're interdependent on each other. Peter is still in love with Shelley, even though it's his fault that she got kicked out of the university. Shelley, in her own way, must have feelings for Peter, otherwise she wouldn't feel the need to bring him back and rip his heart out, literally, since she ripped his out figuratively. And Thomas being kind of stuck in the middle of not knowing who he is or how he fits in with these people or with who he is himself. So I think that mixture, and I love the novel Frankenstein, and I've seen all the movies and all that. I'm a fan of that, but her book is just so incredibly beautifully written, and the themes in that about abandonment, in a sense, in this, I think they're all abandoned. Shelley's been abandoned by staying with his wife, who she has actually killed, and he doesn't know about it until the last moment. They've all been sort of left to fend for themselves, and none of them are whole without each other. And sort of like that last image in the film, and her dance especially, is that striving, I think, to freedom and being whole. And a lot of this too wasn't planned, or it was more subliminal and more subconscious on my part, I think. And then you look into it and think, yeah, that's what's really going on. So I think one of the fun things about writing is you have this framework, you have this outline, you have this idea, and as you write, more things happen that you didn't plan to come out on the page. And then when you're doing it, things come out. And then in the editing, it's like, oh, what's this? And so and then different people see it and they have different feelings about it. And people love it, people hate it, and it's sick, or it's cool, or it's whatever. And to me, it's not even a horror film as much as it is a love story, a very twisted love story, perhaps. But I actually almost think that the horror aspect would come out of it more if you looked at it as a drama, rather than this is a horror movie and you go in expecting the norm. It's not a norm. It's not a usual type of story. And I just sort of went with what I felt at the time when I wrote it. So.
Okay, that's actually a great transition into the next thing that I'd wanted to ask you, which was about how you engage with the influences in this film, and particularly the novel Frankenstein, but also George Romero seems like a massive influence, is zombie movies in particular. So I was wondering how much, when you're creating a film like Corpsing, you're consciously thinking about like, oh, I can borrow this from Mary Shelley or from George Romero, and how much of it is just sort of soaked into the ether that you're then sort of putting it on the page without being sort of purposefully trying to do that.
I think I was obviously aware of the novel of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
I've worked with George a number of times in Bruiser and Day of the Dead and The Dark Half and different things. And I actually rewrote 3 of his screenplays. So I'm and he was a wonderful, wonderful guy. He was very influential. But basically, for me, it was just that awareness. As I was sort of coming up with what the storyline would be, it was definitely a Frankensteinish type of thing, but instead of the typical, it was the woman bringing back the guy and or putting together the guy and who is the guy and who's she talking to and all those sorts of things. But the twist coming from out of the cannibalistic nature that Thomas has, I'm sure that was more of a subliminal George thing, whether that came from this movie or just the genre itself, because having that flaw, that quirk that Thomas had to eat flesh, that eventually became having to eat live flesh, that became having to eat live human flesh. Yeah, you're aware that it's this has been done before, this is that, but it's kind of melding those two things together with a love story. That was sort of my amalgamation of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a unique take on a range of genres. So it's an interesting film in that way.
Yeah, they come together in different ways. And even like the idea, for me, I wasn't going to direct it originally. Tom Savini was going to direct it, and we got closer and closer to production. We were spending money, and he was busy doing other things. We were running out of money to hire a director. And I had a really good first AD, Steve Paris, who was wonderful. So he was going to be able to facilitate a lot of things, because initially the makeup with Thomas took 5 hours and we got it down to 2. But I wasn't necessarily going to play Thomas either. I was thinking about another actor for that. And again, we were running low on money. And then the idea occurred to me, like, if I have to play it, obviously it's going to be even crazier to direct and play this and to play that and keep an eye on, since I was one of the producers and I wrote it and all that. But the idea was, well, if Shelley has made Thomas out of these bodies for Peter, she's kind of made Thomas in Peter's own image. And even though there was a lot of makeup and they didn't look exactly alike, by far, I hope, but there was there is a connection between those two men in her life, the one that she had and has the relationship with, and the person that she created.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point, that even though these are dramatically different relationships in some ways, they're similar. Like there are substantial parallels between the relationships. And having you play both of those characters is a really interesting way of sort of highlighting that subtly. And I think you're absolutely right. The makeup does change your appearance enough that if you hadn't sort of looked at the credits before the film, I feel like you're sort of like, there's something there and I can't tell what it is. It's not clear that it's necessarily you playing both characters, because we get enough of that difference that it's a sort of uncanny connection.
Yeah, and I think that was important. And it was one of those things that came up just out of necessity of budgeting and all that. But I'm glad it did. It made the whole shoot crazier, in its own way. But it was an interesting part of it for me. And I got to, kind of eat a rat, which wouldn't have happened otherwise. So the rat lady came with a big crate of rats, and I was like, I'd like to eat one. Can I stick one of their heads in my mouth? And the lady said, he won't mind. I'm like, oh, good. He won't mind. That's good. So, but he didn't. She said, oh, he'll just look for food in there. And, so I get to do more fun things. So.
That story made the whole interview worthwhile.
Eat a rat. It's not bad.
Okay.
Actually, we sort of you had the camera go off before the crunch that we,
Yep.
of course, added later. But it was a real rat that Shelley dissects in the lab when she takes the heart out. So we brought that from Pitt University, and the guy showed her how to dissect and remove the heart. So we used, as much realism as we could.
Okay. That's actually a great transition into the next thing that I'd wanted to ask you about, which is the theme of teaching. Because Shelley was Peter's student, and then she becomes Thomas's teacher. And a big portion of the runtime of the film is devoted to her trying to help him develop coordination and use Stairmaster or whatever it is, and figuring out how to use a fork and knife, and figuring out how to speak and how to write and draw and all these things. But it's also interesting because Thomas also teaches her, particularly to look at things from a different perspective, and that's another big thing. Like when they're having their meal of chicken, and he takes a portion of the chicken and is eating with his hands, and she says, "Thomas, that's not how we do things. We use a fork and knife." And he says, "But this also works." So you have, and I mean, you, of course, you teach, I teach, so we've got that sort of academic fascination with teaching stories. But can you talk about the theme of teaching in the film and why you made it so central?
Well, I think it's one of those things that subliminally went in there, but you're correct in that they all teach each other. She teaches him, then he teaches her. Peter had taught her before, she's teaching him now. And I think we all teach each other how to treat us. We become who we are because of our relationships with other people. So whether they're formerly teachers, formerly professors, or people that we spend time with, we learn our slang from our friends. We learn more about a topic because we're told, or even if we don't agree, we discuss it and we support our own position on it, but have another take on it, or realize that there is another take on it, even if we don't agree with it. So the idea that they all come together, because it's not like this is about teachers, is that we all are teachers. We're all doing that all the time. And again, going back to that interdependence that they had on with each other, it's so important. I mean, and like the Shelley's dance that we did with the black and white thing, that segment there, I found a lot of the teaching bits basically fun and humorous to do, and like the Stairmaster and things like that, trying to figure those things out. But it's not, I think teaching is fun to do, and I think being a student should be a fun experience. If it's not fun, you're not doing it right. So you're having this experience and saying, yeah, I'm teaching an acting class right now, and we're starting to talk about this character in this piece that this guy's doing, and we start coming up with ideas just in class, and my adrenaline goes up, and he gets involved, and people are saying this or that, and I said, this is the fun. I'm teaching this class, but this thing that like this, the work is the fun. So as you work on the teaching process and the learning process together, whether it's in a formal classroom setting or whether you're just learning with people, you're again going back to experiencing and feeling life and having new experiences. That's what life is about. And I think so often, and this encompasses movies and everything, so often we live a normal life. And I always tell my students that, if you look up the word normal in the dictionary, it says conforming to the standard typical practice. Average, that's what it means. So allowing ourselves to be natural, not normal, allowing ourselves to expand our horizons through the eyes of other people. And again, that coming together of all of us, in this case, literally when they eat him, but just sexually in this, romantically in this. I mean, Shelley has feelings for Peter, but she now has feelings for Thomas, and Thomas has feelings for Shelley, and it's all this, coming together of things. So.
Yeah. All right. So the last thing that I wanted to ask you about is what you've got coming up, what you've got in the works or on the horizon.
Well, a few things. I just optioned a script called Bleed Deep to a company in Los Angeles, so I'm hoping they do well with that. The collaboration, I've had an offer to option that as well, which is another script that Malcolm McDowell wants to do. So
Cool.
hoping that all goes forward. We just got an offer to distribute Actors on Macbeth from a company in New York. It's the pilot for a show called Actors On, where students can explore dramatic literature through the actor's creative process. So we did Macbeth first, and so that was really a lot of fun. I'm writing a TV pilot for a producer in New York, and I'm writing another project to act in with a friend of mine that we are going to start shooting in the spring, and that's called Temporary People. So got a number of balls in the air, and so trying to keep everything going, especially during this crazy time we're in right now.
Yep. Has coronavirus caused you serious problems with production?
Oddly enough, no, in the sense that I'm a hermit anyway, and I stay home and I write and I paint and I cook and I eat and I, play with the cat and all those sorts of things. What has had an impact is obviously work. I'm cast in Eric Red's new movie, No Man's Ridge, which I'm also associate producing. So we're supposed to shoot that in Wyoming, but that keeps getting put off until things can be done safely, as they should be. And so just working on projects outside my study has become a little bit more difficult. But I am teaching some Zoom classes, and I'm teaching some in-person classes, which is a little odd because we're masked and social distanced, and so it's an adjustment to do it that way. But it's a necessary one, and they're small classes, and we're operating under full safety protocol. So they've gone well so far. I've had one in screenwriting, and now doing an acting one.
All right. Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of great stuff going on.
Yeah, I'm trying not to go too schizophrenic, but
Right. I'd meant to say this at the beginning of the interview, but I forgot until just now. For those of you who are interested and haven't yet seen Corpsing, you can actually buy or rent it right here on the YouTube machine. So I think it's available in a couple of other places as well. iTunes, I think, has it, or used to have it at least. But I will put a link both in the top corner of this video and in the description down below if you want to check out that film. It's definitely worth watching. It's very, very interesting. So I recommend it.
Thank you.
And then thank you, Jeff, for agreeing to talk to me.
Well, thanks for the chat. It's been enjoyable.
Yeah.